Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another episode of Substances Explained. Today we're covering a classic substance that I don't feel a lot of people understand too well, other than the fact that it smacks harder than if you smoke it. And I'm talking about cannabis in edible form. See, I'll smoke all the time pretty much with no hesitation, but edibles can be a different ballgame. In most cases, they hit and smack way harder than smoking. And I just don't mean kind of, I'm talking like 4 times as hard, if not harder, and in some different ways too, to the point where it can be borderline psychedelic and trip-like. But why exactly is this? What makes eating cannabis so different than us inhaling it through the lungs? Well, there's a whole different process our bodies undergo in which we produce the substance 11-hydroxy-THC, something that doesn't come up reliably if we smoke. We'll explain exactly how this has effects on the brain and body, plus a good bit of the history, culture, and some other relevant information. So make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this, and let me know what I should cover next. But without further ado, let's dive right into this. So to get us started, we'll cover some of the history of edibles themselves, about when humans first started using it in recipes. We won't cover the origins of cannabis itself too heavily in this video, only because I'm working on another video that will break down how it is when it's smoked. And also, we won't have a strong focus on things like CBD or other all-cannabinoids. The primary focus is going to be the most psychoactive cannabinoid that can be found in cannabis, that being THC, or specifically delta-9-THC. And understand the edible itself can vary heavily at times. And I don't mean just the dosage, but there can be a lot of varying factors. Sometimes the whole plant is used, sometimes it's made into a butter or some other kind of extract, like hash for example, and then put into the recipe. Which this could alter potency, reaction times, digestion, and just possibly the whole experience. But ultimately, THC is being converted into this 11-hydroxy-THC, which we'll break down in a little how that happens. So as we bring up all these different recipes and ways to cook with cannabis, just know the psychoactive product still is essentially the same, most of the time at least. Anyways, the earliest references of cannabis edibles go kind of far back. It's possible that in China, cannabis-infused wine would be used medicinally for surgical procedures, that it could block out pain almost entirely. There's limited information concerning this though, but China does seem to have the oldest records of when cannabis was first integrated. Records suggest hemp has been used possibly as far as 10,000 years ago, where it would be commonly harvested agriculturally. Hemp can be very useful for making things like clothes, paper, and other woven items. But the thing is, in China, intoxication would often be frowned upon by most of the culture. Cannabis wasn't necessarily the main focus of this though, as things like alcohol and opium showed to be much more problematic in ancient China. There is some record that cannabis would be attempted to be eaten as is, without being cooked or anything, but this would not lead to any psychoactive effects directly. THC needs to be decarboxylated for it to be orally active. You'll most likely just feel sick eating it straight up. I would imagine it probably got integrated in cooking in some way at some point, but then again, hemp would be commonly used in a lot of other materials firstly, and at times for some other cultural reasons. But if you want to be specific and exact, it may have been this cannabis resin-infused wine that was the first human-made edible. Thing is with this wine, apparently it was thought so much of it was used that patients would often be rendered unconscious. In fact, this was the goal actually. So it's hard to say how much overall the cannabis effects were actually sought out for. But really the first official practice with an edible seems to come from India. And I mean as an actual food for the experience, not just as a potential medicine. Cannabis will be the main ingredient in a type of edible paste known as bhang. It's part of an ancient Hindu tradition during the spring festivals, which I won't go into the background details too heavily with this, but in their holy books it explains that Shiva brought the cannabis plant down from the Himalayas for the people's use and enjoyment. Shiva ate the leaves of the plant one day after being heated, and he felt so refreshed that he made it his favorite food. And the term bhang doesn't just refer to the plant itself, but the leaves and how it can be refreshing. So most commonly, bhang is made into a liquid, which again, ingredients can't vary, as we see poppy seeds or even nutmeg can be included. But a staple seems to be the common addition of milk, which depending on the preparation, ideally the fats could activate the THC for oral consumption. and a good analogy for this is that Bang is to India what alcohol is to the West. Bang was thought to be used as far back as 2000 BC, and there's a lot more cultural and religious implications about its usage and what it means than what I'm presenting here. Basically though, I would consider this the real first mindful consumption of edible usage. Again, China technically may have been exposed to it at first, but with the culture in India, the actual purpose is to have a psychoactive effect, or I should probably say spiritual. And there is other history that can be found with it, such as in Persia, Siberia, Babylonia, Egypt and whatnot, but it doesn't date as far back as India. We won't break down every little place and how it came to be like that, as this isn't a strongly historical video, but just know in the Eastern world especially, it has been traditional and is highly likely how it eventually made its way to the Western world. It did make its way into Europe in ways, in ancient Rome, Greece and whatnot at some point, even some periods after that, but I really want to focus in on how it made its way into more of the mainstream culture. And I guess not even so much mainstream, but more so the counterculture. A lot of how it first spread across the planet was for its use as a material. And even to this day still, hemp is a commonly used material for many things. Counterculture was a movement mainly during the 1960s where people sought out the free use of psychoactive substances, and naturally cannabis was one of the first choices to go to. Pop brownies are known to be a staple when it comes to edibles, but I do feel like the gummies and chocolate bars more so have taken over these days. Still though, there's just something special about having a good classic weed brownie. And technically we could get into hash in this video, as it played a huge role in the Eastern world, and technically is what led to pot brownies. We could even say Bang is made with a form of hash if we want to get that specific, but they did make another consumable called charras, which is essentially finger hash from farmers. The thing is with hash, you can either choose to smoke it or eat it. It still is recommended to cook with it, but many do claim that it can be done straight up. And there's a ton more history on its use. There's one notable cultural dish known as majoon that came about in Morocco, and then there's a lot of history with it especially in the 1800s and 1900s. But I just feel like hash is kind of its special own thing, and I want to have its own video for it. I personally have yet to try it myself. But the early use of edible history in America might be similar to how it was in China. There was a big push for hemp in the Civil War, and we can see it was used as a medicine and as a pharmaceutical, often in these liquid forms. There's some signs of recreational use, but it was probably very rare and taboo. Various state laws did come into play at first, but it wasn't until later with Mexican immigration did it become a national concern. So pretty quickly in American history, cannabis use was associated with criminality and degeneracy, which of course indirectly, this just fueled criminality and the black market further. Slowly but surely though, the first half of the 20th century, cannabis was made illegal and criminal. It still persisted through various communities, for example notably in the jazz scene, where popular musicians might partake. More people got exposed to it and were more open to the idea of it. So let's jump to the 1960s and the rise of the brownies. Now at this point, cooking with cannabis wasn't necessarily anything new to the Western world. Pretty taboo leading up to the 1960s, but 500 years prior, we can find cannabis actually came up in the first cookbook to ever be printed, coming from Europe. It isn't brownies, but it does instruct to make a kind of oil with it, where you can take it with wine or cake. Again, this is probably very rare based on how the Western world came to be and the values. But it's pretty widely associated that the pot brownie origins came from Alice B. Toklas, in her book, The Alice B. Toklas Cookbook, in 1954. At first, the recipe wasn't published in America, only Europe, until they included the recipe in the second edition in the 60s. It became so famous during the 60s and the counterculture movement that a whole movie came out in 1968 called I Love You Alice B. Toklas, where, that's right, the movie has everyone getting stoned on some pot brownies. But this wasn't necessarily deliberate by any means. First off, the recipe wasn't even actually her own, but from her friend Brion Jacin. She had space to fill to finish her book up and got some help from some friends. So on top of it, it was a last minute decision. It's interesting though because the actual recipe isn't on brownies, but it's more like majoon, as there was no chocolate in the recipe. Still though, it was titled Hashish Fudge and contained dates, nuts, figs, sugar, and other spices. So it was probably just intuitive to people to see what it would be like if they added chocolate and made a brownie out of it. And with the culture and movement going on at the time, it was only a matter of time before this recipe became the staple that it is. Today though, I really don't feel like edibles have the same reputation that they once had before. The reality of how hard they can smack you is still 100% true, but I don't know. I feel like people don't see them as daunting and heavy as they once did. I would say some people see them very casually now and not doing too much. Maybe that's just my own perception on it, but there is other roles like the legalization aspect, how accepted it's become, and also just the known safety profile of it. I haven't heard the term, weed is the devil's lettuce, probably since middle school, and how it can be a gateway drug with all these negative connotations. But even back then, it wasn't as common as it once was before. But while legalization is a great thing, we still should have a degree of seriousness with edibles, a lot more so than smoking. And here we're going to officially switch off from the history, as we gave a big chunk an overview, and we'll get into more of the chemistry and pharmacology now. But the effects can be a lot more heavier compared to smoking. Dosage will play a huge role in this, and also frequency. Someone taking a little 10mg gummy once a week will have a drastically different experience than say someone who tries to eat a 100mg chocolate bar every day. And sometimes the form of the edible can cause some variance. For example, say you drink a tonic versus just chowing on a chocolate bar. Well, you're more likely to have a slow come up if you consume it slower, and you'll get smacked if you just down it all right away. Which I can't say I can give exact dosages here. It's really something you're going to want to check out personally based on tolerance and whatnot and overall susceptibility. My girlfriend smokes all the time, but she took a 20mg gummy and started getting all paranoid and overwhelmed. Then you also have to consider how it will be metabolized by the liver, which we'll break this down more in a little. Not everyone will metabolize it the same, some hardly metabolize any and don't get a high. We have found that CYP2C9 is responsible for breaking down delta-9 THC, and over time in humans, what can happen is something called single nucleotide polymorphisms. Basically, people end up with different alleles, and this will actually affect our metabolism in different ways. One thing you can do is genetic testing and see exactly how your genetics may line up for taking edibles. So it can be a very personal thing and something to start slow with. I would say if you want to get high and you don't have a tolerance, starting with 5 to 10mg will be ideal. While if you have a solid tolerance, more like anything from 20 to 80mg for a good high. Again, maybe a bit less on how you are with it, or maybe a bit more if you're someone who likes to get smacked. When finding this out though, typically it's good to wait at least an hour before deciding for more, possibly even longer. Depending on your stomach contents and other factors affecting your metabolism for that day, it can possibly be delayed for up to 2 hours. This is where many can end up overdoing it and not know till it hits. Microdoses are a totally different thing. With microdosage, you're a lot less likely to have negative side effects. But if you take this to get high all the time, that's a little different. Edibles can work like that, but I find tolerance builds a lot quicker than if you were just to smoke weed. So you'll probably find yourself wanting to dose higher and higher, maybe even more frequently, just so you can still get some satisfying effects. Which this indirectly can lead to potential addiction setting in, maybe some urges or irritability when coming off, or just not when on it. The other thing to consider is the time, that edibles are known to last as long as 6 to up to 10 hours possibly. It's a pretty significant amount of time, unless you plan on going to sleep on it, or if you can't help it that is. And even if you do sleep on it, you may have some residual effects when you wake up, and possibly suffer from a lack in sleep quality. Some people see edibles and think, yeah, let me go knock out for 10 hours or something like that. Which, not saying you'll get bad sleep like this. It can be helpful when done in the right way, but it is possible THC does lead to a lack of REM sleep, or what's your dream state. So doing this all the time for sleep may cause your quality to suffer. But a list of other possible effects can include paranoia, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, appetite enhancement, psychedelia, depersonalization, derealization, sedation, fits of laughter, euphoria, time distortions, or maybe something even like nausea. Poor decision making and rationalities may also be considered a risk factor. Then psychiatric and cardiovascular complications are more often reported when we look at hospital visits. Then there's also something known as cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, a condition causing nausea, vomiting, and severe abdominal cramping, resulting from too much high-dose THC consumption over time. On top of things, THC in cannabis may be harmful to kids and young adults still going through brain development, that it can potentially throw things off of memory and drive. It may also result in respiratory depression, something which won't happen in adults, which this can be life-threatening. This also applies for pregnancies and breastfeeding, so definitely a good deal of things to be mindful of. There is a balance though, of course, with other positives like medicinal benefits for things like cancer and other chronic conditions, helping with pain and inflammation. But why and how are edibles so much stronger and powerful compared to just smoking? Well, we have to take a look inside our bodies for what happens when we eat an edible. So once we eat an edible, it goes through our gastrointestinal tract. From our guts, the delta-9 THC is absorbed into the bloodstream and then travels to the liver, where it undergoes metabolism. Once there, liver enzymes hydroxylate delta-9 to form 11-hydroxy delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. From there, it does get metabolized further into 11-nor-9-carboxy THC, which is a non-active cannabinoid. But this is what typically will stick around in fatty deposits. Both of these enter the bloodstream and get absorbed by fats, majority to the brain as it's mostly a fatty organ. 11-hydroxy THC has shown to be more potent than delta-9. It is a partial agonist of the cannabinoid receptors just like delta-9, but we can see with a much stronger binding affinity, and also appears in the blood plasma in much higher quantities. On top of this, it has shown to cross the blood-brain barrier much more rapidly. This is partially why it's thought to be stronger and last longer. Compared to smoking, it is thought to be up to 4 to 6 times as strong. In other words, this route of administration has a much higher bioavailability. But this is how edibles essentially work in the body. It has to go through this first pass metabolism that activates the decarved weed. The longer duration may suggest that it may do a better job at treating chronic pain and insomnia, among many other effects. Insomnia more reliably, since smoking has that short duration. The strength though too can just make it a more effective option. Having to not smoke too is another big reason people may take edibles at all. I know a good handful of people who just rather not put anything into their lungs like that, which that's a real concern with smoking I'm going to cover in the next video. Besides that, edibles are known to have more of a body high than a head high, and be heavier like I said before. Most would agree that it is strongly a body high, though the psychoactive effects can be just as strong, if not stronger at times. But that body high always seems to be consistent. Now I said before, we weren't going to focus on all cannabinoids, or even CBD really. But one thing we do have to bring up that may explain edibles' strong body high is the CBN content. CBN, or cannabinol, can be taken on its own, but many don't realize that it's often a byproduct when consuming cannabis, whether that's smoking or with edibles. It will be commonly present in cannabis, where typically the older the cannabis gets, THC ends up converting into CBN over time. It also just happens when it's exposed to heat and oxygen, and to make edibles, that's what the decarving process will do. CBN isn't 100% like CBD, but it is comparable. Apparently it can be mildly psychoactive on its own, but most commonly it helps as a sleep aid and with pain relief. But besides that, that's pretty much most of the base things about edibles. There's a lot of things in the moment that it can impact with your mind and body, and just to go over some things again, things like your attention, thinking, memory, learning, emotions, movement, coordination, reaction time, time perception, and overall ability with some things. These things are temporary though, but if you do it too often is when it may become a problem. Responsible safe practice and finding the right balance are key if you want to take edibles. They can be really good at times, provide a much stronger cannabis experience, which may result in more euphoria, feeling more stoned, immersed in the experience, and of course providing a lot of those medicinal qualities. But I just wanted to break this down and give a lot of the essential information concerning edibles. as I will have a review video with them coming up soon. But we're gonna end things here. Let me know your experience with edibles and how you like to take them. I typically have some like once a week, just some gummies as of recent. Not too much more than that, as I do feel like I need a day or so just to get my mind and body back to baseline and not be so flushed with THC. The more THC we consume, the more that lingers. But let me know what I should cover next. Make sure to check out the socials and like and subscribe. It's been someone that's a no one, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.